Hello again, everybody. This is John with BestPriceNutrition.com. You'll notice Glenn's not here. He actually got tickets to the Ellen Show, so he actually flew out there, so be sure to give him a hard time. Nothing wrong with the Ellen Show, I just think it's kind of funny. But anyways, we've accumulated questions from you guys, either from communicating on our videos or through private messages and also on Facebook. So we wanted to run through and answer some of these questions, and thank you. We got a lot of questions. Some of them we're not really qualified to answer, so I don't really feel comfortable answering some of them if we don't have full knowledge. I mean, pretty sure on some of them, but I'd hate to go on and give an answer that we're not, relatively sure on. So we don't want to do that to you guys. But kicking it off right away, one of the questions we got is, does it really matter if I eat white rice, brown rice, or pasta? And he said, I don't quite get all the reports. They're all over the place. I know glycemic index is not important, but why should I choose, say, white rice over brown rice and for gaining weight? Well, really what it comes down to is glycemic index matters for diabetics. And glycemic index, for those of you guys that don't know, it's a rating to figure out how quickly carbohydrates turn to sugar in your blood. How much do they elevate your blood sugar levels. So they matter for diabetics for that reason, obviously. They have to watch insulin, whether you're talking about type 1, where they're insulin dependent, or type 2, where they have some issues to sensitivity to insulin. But for those of us who are not, these carbohydrates, there's a lot of issues with them with white rice versus brown rice, for instance. Brown rice has the hull and the germ layer of the seed, which is where something called phytates are contained. We did a video recently on paleo, and it kind of talks about that. And phytates it's basically compounds that inhibit your body's ability to absorb nutrients, because we as mammals, we have our mechanisms for fighting back against some kind of attack or something like that. Well, plants have mechanisms too to keep animals from eating them, and that's what's in the hull or the germ layer of these seeds. Now, if you soak brown rice and it ferments, then you're fine. You could eat it. And this is not something like, because a lot of people say, well, I know brown rice is healthy and so on and so forth, but this is not something you notice like overnight. These things tend to accumulate over time. So white rice, when we say it's good, it's because it's just the starch. Now pasta, there's gluten in there, so for some of us, you can't handle gluten. I personally have never had a problem, but there's a lot of people, we're seeing more and more with celiac disease, and there's varying degrees of it too, where some people have more problems than others when it comes to that. So that's really what that comes down to. And when we say glycemic index doesn't matter, it matters at certain times of the day, like post-workout. You want high glycemic index carbs. But just to put that in context, if you ate 200 grams of, say, white rice one day and you had 200 grams of sugar, you may feel a little bit different, but really, you still get 200 grams of carbohydrates. So in terms of caloric intake, it really doesn't make as much of a difference as we've long thought. And that's not to say that foods are different in terms of thermic effect and things like that. It's just specific to glycemic index. Sometimes too much is made out of that. Next, somebody had a question about your thoughts on IIFYM, which is basically, as they explain it, you can eat anything as long as it fits into your calorie and macro ratio. Again, that kind of goes along with before. Not all foods are created equal. Like we said, white rice we think is better than brown rice because of those phytates. And there are things that you'd want to avoid in your diet and things that you'd want to take in. So not necessarily. That's not true, as long as it fits within some kind of a calorie scale. Now, there's certain things that we know you want to avoid, like trans fats and, like we said, cereal grains, things like that. So there's an answer for that one. Try and go through these as quickly as I can. Best source and type of protein. Now, that's a question that depends upon the individual. Some people have, for instance, casein allergies, so we couldn't sit here and say, well, casein's the best. Some people can't have any lactose, so then we'd say, okay, well, you could probably do a whey protein isolate, specifically like a cross-flow microfiltration whey protein isolate. That's going to be your best form of whey. For others, if you completely want to avoid dairy and stuff, there are some vegan protein powders out there that combine a lot of sources of protein so as to get a better amino acid profile, because many of the vegan and vegetarian proteins out there tend to lack in like BCAAs and other amino acids that you want more in terms of building muscle. So that's a question, like I said, that really depends upon what we're talking about here. Within whey protein, it's a cross-flow microfiltration whey protein isolate. Casein, it's going to be a micellar casein. Okay, another question we got. This one is from Jack. It's which is the better type of carb to consume post-workout? Dextrose, maltodextrin, or waxy maize starch? Well, we'd say dextrose and maltodextrin. Dextrose it's a monosaccharide. It's glucose. It's sugar already. It's going to get into your system very fast. It's got a high glycemic index, as we just talked about. So it's going to spike insulin, and that's what you want post-workout. Same with maltodextrin. Maltodextrin is a little bit different. It's actually a polysaccharide. It could be anywhere from 2 to 20 dextrins is kind of how they measure it. And it has a very high glycemic index because it has very weak bonds, so your body's able to hydrolyze it very fast. So its glycemic index is not all that different from dextrose. Waxy maize starch has become an umbrella term. It's marketing nonsense. For the most part, it's going to be amylopectin, and it's not going to be do all these things that we say where it's like the snowball effect, taking everything with it, tumbling down the hill. It's just not true, and it's been proven now to be inferior to dextrose and maltodextrin, and it tends to cost more too. People charge more for it. So we'd recommend staying away from waxy maize starch at this point in time. Okay, so more questions. Let's see. Oops. Okay, another one we got is, what is the best ratio of grams of protein per pound of body weight? We've done a video on this before, and typically we recommend, based on research, is 0.75 to 1 gram per pound of your goal body weight. And it's going to be determined somewhat by your goals too. I mean, as long as you get that 0.75 to 1 gram of protein, you're going to be in good shape. Now, your goals are going to dictate how much fat and how much carbohydrates you get in your diet, because those are what we want for energy. Now, that's not to say they don't perform other functions, but we want those to be burned for energy so that we can use our protein to build muscle and also build other structures in your body. You're made of protein for the most part. You know, your hair is keratin. You know, your muscles are actin and myosin. Those are all proteins, and there are essential amino acids that our bodies cannot manufacture. So you have to get it from exogenous sources, aka food and or supplements. So that's where that's going to come from. So that's the best way we can answer that one. Here's another. This is kind of a funny one. What pisses you off at the gym? That's quite subjective, and I think that's going to vary from person to person. But I'd say just in general, people don't pick up after themselves, or the guy who sweats like a pig and just drenches stuff and doesn't wipe up after himself. That's pretty disgusting. But I guess that's a subjective one. So I just thought that was funny. Here's another one. This one is, does cardio hurt muscle mass? That's an interesting one because it really depends. The thing is that your body adapts to what you do. So hence you'll look at sprinters, and sprinters look like, bodybuilders basically. They've got these great physiques, small waist, big legs, big upper body to propel them through running. Because their body has adapted to, let's say, run 100 meters as fast as possible, like a cheetah. You've adapted your body to that. So what does your body do? Within reason, as far as aka what your genetics are going to allow, your body's going to recruit more fast twitch muscle fibers and adapt to that kind of training. Now, if you run marathons, let's just say, well, your body doesn't need those fast twitch muscle fibers because they don't work with the oxidative or aerobic pathway. They'll kind of actually slow you down. That's why sometimes you'll see people who run distance who are a little bit chubbier but not quite as muscular actually be able to run distance better than somebody who's really lean and muscular and has some more of that fast twitch muscle, because that muscle sucks up precious oxygen that you need, but it doesn't necessarily help you run better at those distances. So it's not to say that long-term cardio is going to turn you into that. It's just that if you mix, if you do some of your long-term cardio with some of your, strength training, explosive training, you're probably going to be fine. But really, you got to figure out what your goal is. And generally, you can get by with doing a lot less of that low-intensity cardio and still get really lean and build a lot of muscle and still be in real good shape, because you can do more metabolic training, things like CrossFit, where you're really, really pushing the limit. Your lactate threshold and VO2 max is constantly being pushed. So hopefully I answered that one okay for you. Obviously, these are big questions which can go way in a lot of different directions, but that's in general. And also diet will play a role in that too. If you're not eating enough protein and getting your other macronutrients, that's going to play a role in your physique as well as training. Somebody had a question about sleep. How important is sleep? Well, sleep is really important for growth. If you don't sleep enough, you're not going to be healthy. If you're not healthy, your body's not going to build extra muscle tissue, because your body doesn't need, vanity muscles to function. Your body's going to take care of the minimal, take care of your organs before it's going to build all this extra muscle for vanity. So, lack of sleep can lead to elevated stress hormones. There's also something to biological rhythms, and they've done research to see that people live longer if they stick to some kind of a circadian rhythm. And there's also some myths too. So this one I'm not going to go too in depth with, because to be quite frank, I haven't done all the research on it, but this is just kind of off the top of my head and what I've read and know from research and stuff. So sleep's important. There's not a magic number either, real quick too. I don't want to say everyone has to get 8 hours. It's dependent upon what you're doing in each individual, but I'm sure there is a floor. Not exactly sure where that exists. And there's also a ceiling. There's such thing as too much, it doesn't apply. It's not like too much fun. There's actually such thing as too much sleep. Okay, next is, somebody asked about skull crushers. Now, I don't do a lot of the isolated movements anymore. I used to do more of the bodybuilding workouts. I stick to more CrossFit. So I don't really do them anymore, but I used to. And I do know that a lot of trainers and stuff, especially those training like athletes, like baseball players, football players, they won't have athletes do anything isolated for their triceps, where they're pushing their triceps in, or whether it's press downs or skull crushers or anything like that. because your elbows are in a compromising position where you're pushing them in, and I think it puts a lot of stress on the joint. That's why you see a lot of people get tendonitis and stuff from those things. So you could build your triceps up just by doing your bench presses or any kind of pressing action. Your triceps are heavily recruited in that. Now you may not feel that same burn as you would per se if you're isolating it, but I think you can build them pretty good. There may be bodybuilders and stuff who disagree, so I wouldn't dig my heels in on that one, but I'd say if it hurts, stop doing them. Rely on more compound movements to build your triceps. Okay. Next, what are the benefits of eating pre and post-workout? And somebody else asked a similar question, which would be, if you go to the gym first thing, how important is your pre-exercise meal? Well, the thing about like a pre-workout meal is you don't want to eat too close to your workout because you don't want to draw a bunch of blood into your gut. You want to minimize that because a lot of food draws blood to your gut. It's not in your brain. It's not in your muscles. You're going to be tired. You're not going to perform as well. So typically pre-workout meals, what we talk about, about 4 hours before is really what's going to dictate your energy levels. That's based on research. Now, it's not to say you can't eat like a couple hours before. You certainly can. That's fine. But be selective about that. Don't eat anything that's going to weigh you down or draw too much blood into your gut, aka a big meal. Post-workout is very important. You're going to want to get some high glycemic index, fast-absorbing carbohydrates. Again, we talked earlier about that's when it matters. And really fast-absorbing protein. That's very, very important. That insulin spike is going to help drive everything into your cells. And if you're a natural guy, getting that insulin spike is really going to help you build muscle. So that's something that you really want to work on. And again, the same applies for getting all that into your gut. Sometimes people think, I got to take 50, 60 grams of protein immediately after I work out. Well, if you do that, that's too much protein for most people, unless you're some giant, because your body has to kind of put on the brakes and assimilate and break down all that protein. You want to go with less than that. A guy 180 pounds, that might be like 50 grams of carbs, 25 grams of protein, somewhere in there. Because you've got blood in your muscles and stuff from working out. It's not going to be able to get driven into your gut super quick. So that's part of why you see the rise of hydrolyzed proteins, because your body can absorb free-form amino acids, dipeptides, and tripeptides without having to break them down at all. They literally absorb once they hit the duodenum in your small intestines. The di and tripeptides tend to absorb better than free-form amino acids because your liver is going to limit how many free-form amino acids end up in the blood. So if you could find good hydrolysates that are very rich in di and tripeptides and low in free-form amino acids, that's going to be ideal. Okay, another question is, somebody asked about traditional cardio or circuit training, and why do people think they can turn fat into muscle? I don't know why people think they can turn fat into muscle. I've always wondered that, where I'm gonna burn all my fat and turn it into muscle. You hear that a lot. Or I'm gonna get rid of all this fat and then I'm gonna try and build muscle. Well, you can do two things at once. You can burn fat and build muscle, especially if you're somebody who's untrained. You've not trained before and you just want to get lean. You certainly can. Again, the traditional cardio circuit training, I'm more of the circuit training type because I do CrossFit workouts. That's kind of going to combine, Olympic lifts, some gymnastic stuff, some metabolic conditioning. So I like that. I find that it gets you in the best shape. But there are people who like, to do more bodybuilding types, and they'll just make them more intense workouts where they'll do drop sets, supersets. They'll go back and forth between bench press and pull-ups. That's fine too. And again, traditional cardio, that's fine too. I would just kind of limit that because I think, research has shown that athletes who can compete and do more metabolic conditioning tend to do better at those distance events than they do just training distance events. In fact, most of your elite long distance runners mix in a lot of sprinting and stuff. You're starting to see more of that come into play. So again, there are better experts than that than me on that for sure, but that's just a brief touch on that subject. Okay, let's see. Sorry, there's a lot of overlap on some of these questions, so if we skipped anybody's, please don't be offended. It's just because we only have so much time, plus some people ask similar questions. So if you could take one supplement, what would it be? That's kind of hard to say because it would really depend upon what's available to me, because supplements are to fill in gaps in your diet. So let's just say I was somewhere and I couldn't get a lot of cold water fish, but I had access to other things like a lot of protein. I can get my healthy vegetables and fruit and stuff like that. Well, then I would take an essential fatty acid supplement, specifically omega-3s, because I wouldn't have access to those as much. If I lived in an area where I couldn't get access to, say, the sunlight and there wasn't a lot of vitamin D in my foods, I would take vitamin D. So I think it's very important. Another thing would be probiotics. If I didn't have access to, probiotic-rich foods, aka unpasteurized dairy and things like that, then I would take a probiotic supplement. If I had access to all those three, but I had trouble getting in enough protein in my diet, I would look toward a protein powder, or more specifically a post-workout powder, because I think I could fill in the protein in my diet. But ideally, those would be like 4 supplements that I would definitely include. It would be like protein powder, post-workout, probiotics, omega-3, essential fats, vitamin D. So I guess that's 5. Sorry about that. But again, that one's a little bit hard to answer because it really depends upon what you have available. So I didn't mean to try and spin on that one. That's just the reality. Another person asked, what kind of exercise can I do in a swimming pool at the gym to get my heart rate up? Not a swimmer, not sure. I've done swimming, and I know that something that always worked for me would be doing sprints, where you'd set the clock to get across like a high school pool, which I think is like half the size of an Olympic, 30 seconds there, and you get there in probably under 30, you got 10 seconds to rest, and you just keep doing those sprints. That would be my suggestion, but I'm sure there's somebody out there who knows some water aerobics that I'm not aware of. What is the most overlooked supplement? Now that's a tough one too. I'd say right now vitamin D is really overlooked because in terms of the amount of research showing how beneficial it is, the lack of it that we get in our diets, and something that should be supplemented would be vitamin D. Probiotics are another area, so that would be like a number 2 because I think we're seeing more and more research show how much it helps, with all the GERD and heartburn and things like that, where we're actually doing the opposite to treat those by lowering acid levels. Actually increasing acid would be better, and that's what a lot of these microbes do. We have a 10-to-1 ratio of bacteria, microbes, aka probiotics in our body, to cells. So we are literally big blobs of bacteria as well. So those are really important too. In terms of sports supplements, I think creatine monohydrate gets overlooked. There's so much research on it, and every company is coming out with some new novel form of creatine, trying to charge you more for it, independent of any actual research to show that it works. Creatine monohydrate works. It's got a ton of research on it. It's the most effective performance-enhancing supplement there is. So I think it gets overlooked sometimes because people are always looking for the next best thing when it's right there for you. Okay, let's see. So here's one. Considering all of the different thoughts on the subject, how do I decide how many calories to consume daily in an attempt to gain good weight? Well, we just did the video on how to gain weight, and as we discussed, not all calories are created equal, but in general, without going crazy, get an idea of how much you're eating per day. Don't stress yourself out or anything like that, and then start slowly adding in a serving of carbohydrates and fat. Now, we're assuming you're getting enough protein already. You're getting your 3/4 to 1 gram per pound of your goal body weight, and then slowly add in a serving of carbohydrates and fat. I mean, it could be, adding in a container of yogurt or adding in a sweet potato with some butter on it. Just that per day, and that might be enough so that you could stay kind of lean but still get enough calories so that you're going to build enough muscle. If that doesn't work, add on from there because you have a good starting point. So that would be one method. If you want more detail, we do have that video on how to gain weight. Next would be, the best way to keep your shaker clean, how to get rid of that funky smell. Well, first, I would look for a shaker like the Blender Ball by Sundisa. That one doesn't have any gaskets in it, and it's usually in those gaskets in that little nook and cranny where you're going to get that powder stuck up in there. I know I've pulled old ones out of the dishwasher, and it's got that terrible smell. So that would be number 1, and maybe get like a little brush to clean around the rim. But if you can avoid letting your protein sit after you shake it, clean it right away, rinse it, get it in the dishwasher, what have you, that's going to help. And avoid shakers that have gaskets in there because that tends to be a household for those little bug critters that get in there and make it smell. Okay, let's see here. Some more questions. Top 3 useless supplements. That's funny. I generally, if you see our videos, the nitric oxide products to date are seriously lacking any evidence to show that they significantly increase nitric oxide, so the pump products. Now, some of them might have useful stimulants that make you feel good, and that's certainly okay. But if somebody's telling you, the whole point of this product is to give you a pump and dilate your blood vessels, if you have otherwise healthy blood pressure and stuff, it's really not going to do much for you. Most of those ingredients tend to help people who have constricted blood vessels or have high blood pressure as a result of that. There tends to be an ability for the body to use those nutrients like citrulline to return your body to homeostasis, but otherwise healthy individuals, that's lacking. An individual supplement, we've reviewed it before, anabolic halo. I mean, the price of that stuff, the amount of ingredients in there, and the lack of research, the idea that you need to take in these free-form amino acids and the other 80 ingredients on there. It's probably a pretty cheap product to put together, putting in the ingredients, and it's just not, I would not recommend using that post-workout. Another thing would be all the novel forms of creatine that we touched on, creatine ethyl ester, things like that. Utter lack of evidence. In fact, creatine ethyl ester has evidence to show that it's quite ineffective relative to creatine monohydrate, so that would be one to skip on. And another one, we did a video on that there were some strong opinions about it, is HumaPro. The idea that free-form amino acids for humans should replace protein in your diet is utterly absurd and ridiculous, and the burden of proof is on the company to prove somehow that theirs is better and it's made for humans, which it's absurd, but that's one there. Let's see, a few more here. How are we doing on time? We're good? Okay. While on a diet, is it better to not have cheat days at all, or does it help to have one every now and then? Most evidence shows that it's good to cheat every once in a while, say once a week, maybe even twice a week, or what have you, a meal here, a meal there. And a lot of that too is for peace of mind, because sometimes if you stress yourself out so much that you're on these diets and stuff, well, that can affect you too. I mean, stressing yourself out and doing those things can play quite a trick on your body, be it in your stomach and not being able to eat and just getting tired of the monotony and stuff like that. So yeah, have some pizza and stuff once in a while, even if you're dieting. It's certainly okay. Just don't take that to mean every night, beer and pizza is the way to go. That's not ideal. Just, Saturday night, maybe Sunday morning, have a big breakfast. You're probably going to be fine. But again, it's all relative to what you're doing the rest of the week too. So that's something to consider. Do test boosters really work? That's an interesting one, and a lot of the pro hormones that were out before all the bans, some of them were actually quite effective. What has come out since in terms of pro hormones, pretty much what happens is these guys will find they'll go into old chemistry books, find steroids that were out like in the 50s and stuff that weren't made because they were too toxic, so therefore they're not banned. Well, they'll call China or wherever and say, hey, can you guys make this? They can make it for pennies on the dollar. These guys are very short-sighted. They're trying to make a quick buck. They're, like I said, highly toxic to the liver. Now, they may actually work in terms of increasing testosterone, but they're probably very toxic as well. And quite frankly, they're quite expensive too. So we'd recommend staying away from those. Natural testosterone boosters, the evidence is lacking at this point. There are some promising ingredients, but nothing concrete. There's the one study on D-aspartic acid that looks promising, but we have to see more. I mean, one 12-day study shouldn't justify everyone and their mother putting it in their supplements. So let's see some more research on those. But right now, there's nothing really we're over the moon on. Obviously, we have a vested interest. It'd be wonderful if there was something, because then we could sell a lot of it. But right now, there's really not too much out there. There's a few, like I said, that look promising. In the future, we'll have some videos on those, hopefully. But right now, there's nothing we're over the moon on. This is a good one. Good protein shakes for people who have to watch their cholesterol and calories. This is interesting because there's a lot of myths as it pertains to cholesterol. When you get your cholesterol checked, I recommend you get a VAP test. It's a vertical auto profile test, and specifically what it's going to do is it's going to separate out the types of LDL cholesterol and the ones that are really bad, and also the whole link between saturated fat and high cholesterol and the link to heart disease. Well, what it would say is that any diets in the world that have high cholesterol should also have heart disease. Well, the evidence isn't there, actually. There's plenty of diets in the world and people in the world who eat very high cholesterol diets that don't have the heart disease. Same thing with saturated fat. So there's some videos by Chris Kresser we recommend. They're called I Have High Cholesterol and I Don't Care. Really recommend checking those out because he goes through by detail. He's much more informed on the topic than I am. And he can tell you specifically, he goes back, looks at research, and explains what, some of the things that have been done. For instance, the saturated fat. I believe it was in the 70s there was a lot of research done, and the landmark research that's led to where we're at today with that is they found some countries that had low saturated fat diets that had low incidence of heart disease. They found, and now I'm going on to saturated fat, but they also found countries that had high saturated fat that had high incidence of heart disease. Well, they also found a lot of countries that had diets that were high in saturated fat that were low in heart disease, and they found more that were actually low in saturated fat and high in heart disease. So what did the researcher do? He threw out the evidence that didn't fit his curve, which should look like this. It would look more like this, so there was no correlation. And Chris kind of goes back and looks at a lot of that research and explains exactly what it is and debunks that myth. So check that out. Really, really important, because a lot of the cholesterol drugs out there are a big wet blanket on your system. So really, really, really do your research. Don't listen to us. We're not doctors, but do your research yourself. Really, really investigate that, because I think that's really important. Let's see. How do I figure out how much protein I should eat a day to lose weight? And this one's from a female, and I say that because females sometimes get the idea that, hey, if I'm going to eat all this protein, I'm going to turn into She-Ra or something like that. It's not going to happen. You don't have the endocrine system to do it. The women that you're seeing in the magazines that look like, guys and stuff, they're on drugs. They're on steroids. So don't worry about that. Now, you still want to shoot for about that 3/4 of a gram to 1 gram protein per pound of your goal body weight if your goal is to stay lean and stay in shape and things like that. And then your carbohydrate and fat level is going to dictate where you need to be in terms of, how much do I need, how much do I not need, and it's all going to be relative to activity level. So don't go crazy pulling out the calculator and stuff, but just like we told the person who gains weight, maybe you eliminate a little serving of carbohydrates and fat, but not so little that you're unhealthy. So you got to find that nice happy medium. Get an idea of what you're eating currently. If you're continuing to gain weight, well then you need to cut those calories down, but keep the protein at about 3/4 to 1 gram per pound of your goal body weight. You could probably go a little bit lower than that. Again, we're speaking as if you're an athlete, you're competing, and you're doing some workouts, maybe at least 4 days a week, an hour, give or take. So hope that helps out answer that question. And let's see. This is one. Can you gain weight on a carbohydrate-restricted diet such as a ketogenic diet? Ketogenic diets always confuse me because at some point your body is going to turn fat into carbohydrates, the triglycerides. You end up with ketone bodies and you end up with glucose. So why restrict your body from getting carbohydrates? Have some. It's okay. It's going to be your total calories, and again we talked about it, some foods have more of a thermic effect, but going ketogenic is not necessarily the way to go. The people who lose weight on it and they say, oh, I lost weight in a couple weeks. Well, yeah, if you're losing a lot of water, because ketone bodies tend to be diuretics, so that weight loss is not like you're losing a bunch of body fat. And also people on those diets, they are really restricting their calories, so of course you're going to lose weight. But you can do the same by filling in some carbohydrates and stuff too. It's going to be much healthier and better for you. So again, we can go more in depth than that, but I think that kind of summarizes the thoughts on that. So that's all the questions, guys. I hope I was able to answer them. I know some of them kind of just stayed on the outside of them, didn't want to go too deep. Some of that is just because of time. Also, you can go in a lot of different directions. So you guys have questions to follow up, if you post them down there, we'll try and answer them. Some of the questions, like we said, guys, if we skip them, we didn't mean to skip them. It's just that I'm pretty sure I know the right answer to some of them, but I don't want to come in here and be Mr. Know-It-All because I don't know all of them and I can't be 100% sure. So I don't want to be sitting here telling you, hey, this is this and that, and then I may go do some more research and say, well, actually that was wrong. So we're not perfect, but that's why we may have skipped some of your questions. So hopefully we did a good job of answering them. We really appreciate it. We'll try and do these in the future if you guys like them. So we'll keep you posted and let you know. And we appreciate all the support. You can always check us out at facebook.com/bestpricenutrition. And again,